Okay, so to start off with, tell us a bit about what your writing process is like. Are you more a plotter or a pantser?
So, plotter or pantser. Now I'm more of a floating outliner, I would say. I started off as a pantser because I didn't really know what I was doing. And there are plenty of famous pantsers out there, so I thought if they can do it, I can do it. I think the thing with pantsing is if you do it well, you do it well when you're experienced. So I started plotting, and then that came out a little bit more contrived. I was worried that it would just seem too affected in the plot, and now I do a combination of both. So I'll plan a little, write a little, and then refine afterwards.
And that works well for you, does it?
It works well for me, I think, because having an idea of where I'm going helps, but I don't want to know the exact destination. Kind of like going on a walk. You know where you're going to head to. You've got a map to guide you, but the map doesn't show you everything like what you see with your eyes. So the walk itself is a surprise. The ending, the things that happen from A to B, are a bit of a surprise, but you know where you're going, and I think you need to know where you're going so you don't get the dreaded writer's block or something like that. I think if you do get writer's block, it's probably because you don't know where you're going, or if you've not done enough research, because you can't sculpt without clay.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a floating outline. It's my clay. It's rough, but I've got something to work with.
And when you first started working on May Contain Space Pirates, which we're going to come back to later, but specifically with regards to plotting, pantsing, what was your approach initially with May Contain Space Pirates?
So, as you know, because you edited it and you worked through it, it was a bit of a bone of contention, right?
Yep.
And that was because it's the first thing I wrote. They say you never publish the first thing you write.
Or that you shouldn't.
Not that you shouldn't. It's not that you never publish the thing that you write. It's that you generally don't publish the thing that thing. So it's true in a way. I wrote Space Pirates. It was called 58. But the thing that got published into a book is a far cry from the original. The original I started writing back in 2000 and something, and it was a mess. I was obsessed with Pirates of the Caribbean at the time, and pirates in general, revived by the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, and I wanted to write something with pirates in it in space, and that's as far as it got in terms of planning. And I'd recently read Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and also listened to the radio broadcast of it as well, because a friend of mine was into the older versions of it when they originally aired on BBC, and it was a mess. It was a complete mess.
Space Pirates.
Space Pirates was a complete mess. I wrote it in a completely different tense, changed the tense, changed it back again. Changed focal characters. I didn't know what the hell I was doing with it, and that reflected in the editing process. It was a nightmare to pull it together, but I like to think what the reader gets now is a nice multiple perspective, and multiple tense as well, which isn't common in writing, but I think it was what the book needed. Because there were so many dynamics going on with the crew and the story itself, and there's so many things going on in that particular story without ruining it and any spoilers, but there are things going on in the background that the main character 58 doesn't know about, and I wanted to foreshadow that without giving it away, because it's going to be 3 books.
And we're going to come back to that later.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
So these days, floating outliner.
Yes, I think it's best for me. and for my editor,
definitely.
you.
Yeah. Yeah. 58 was May Contain Space Pirates was definitely a learning curve for both of us, wasn't it?
What was the hardest part of it
for me?
Yeah, sorry, throwing it back at you.
Keeping going with the millionth read through, given that I first encountered it in 2004, I think.
Yeah, that's when I started.
When it was 58.
Mm-hmm.
I've lost track of how many times I've seen different iterations of that story.
Yeah.
So it's I really enjoyed working on the final book, but I'm glad that one's been put to bed now, if I'm completely honest.
Me too. I was sick and tired of it, and by the end of it. But I think you get like that with projects. As a writer, that writer back in 2004 knew I was very needy, and there's no community around me, and lots of doubts as a writer. So I needed to hear. And that's why you were getting. I'd write something and hand it to you, and like take it back and listen. And I just would not do that now with first. Nobody sees my first drafts now.
Your process has definitely changed.
Unless I've written a really cool line that I'm really pleased with, I might share it. But generally, no, not until like the second or third draft once it's been pulled together. Yeah.
Cool. So, moving on then. When you're writing, what do you do to get inside your characters' heads?
Now, to get inside their heads, it's a good question. I guess now it's a lot easier. Like I said before, you need clay to work with. So I plan the character out in terms of where they're from, so their history. I do a backstory. I might interview them with interview questions. It's a common technique a lot of people do, and it's really useful. So in that process, you get some interview questions, ask the character, and answer in a character's voice. And it's amazing what comes up, actually. You can kind of fool yourself that you are the character and the interviewer. So I do that. I also decide on their driver. It's really important. If your character doesn't have a driver, you don't know where they're going. What is their end goal? And then what is the thing that they're actually doing? Because what the character thinks they're doing and what they actually achieve are usually two different things. Just think about yourself in life, what your goal is in life and what's actually happened as you've been on that journey. And I apply that. That would be the write what you know kind of advice that it's kind of useful and not useful, because a lot of people don't. What does that mean? I interpret it as meaning like taking from those experiences and applying them to characters. So to get into my characters' heads, I reflect on myself. I do in my own life. I do an interview, and I'll write a backstory for them, and that way they've got history. And if they've had trauma in the past, then that will affect how they react to certain things. So I just ask myself, what would person X do if Z happens? And it's different for each character. That's how I do it now.
When you say about writing those backstories, how long are they typically in terms of pages?
Depends on the type of character. If it's your primary character, so your focal character, I might actually write a story, a short story where they go off and do something. Or I will plot out a timeline from their birth to their death beyond the story, and take aspects of that in relation to the current story I'm writing and that timeline, and then flesh out those stories. Okay. I like to think about way beyond the story in the novel that I'm writing the character for, because then I can foreshadow really cool stuff. So if later I turn it into a series, the reader will read the first book and think, "Oh wow, that relates." It's almost as if they were fated, and we get that in our own lives. So again, pulling on reality.
So various techniques.
I don't think there's one technique that a writer would generally stick to. I think if you do that, you just become contrived and your work can become very samey. I'm a very changeable person, and I get bored easily with the same thing. But also, I like to try, because you never know. You never know. The thing that worked well before might be really good, but there might be even something better out there, and it depends on the story. Each story is different. I'm writing a horror at the moment, so I'm having to use slightly different techniques because I'm getting into a different situation with the characters, and they're different people from the people in, say, Space Pirates, which is a comedy, fantasy, sci-fi. So again, pulling on different backgrounds and aspects of that character's background and different techniques.
Sure, I suppose writing a horror, you're going to be thinking more deeply about what will make your characters feel afraid, and that might not have been such an important thing when we're writing a comedy, for example.
Yeah, I mean, 58 in Space Pirates has his fears. The chief one being the fear of, I think, being left alone, and not being loved. But in the current piece I'm writing, it's more visceral fears, because it's a body horror, so it makes more sense. If I did that with 58, it would be a completely different story for Space Pirates.
And you just mentioned that you're working on a horror. So thinking about that, do you listen to music while you write to get into a certain headspace? And if so, what are your favourites?
So I definitely listen to music. Music's a very important thing to me, always has been since I encountered it and then had a choice of what music I listen to. For Space Pirates, I listened to piratey music and spacey music, I guess, to get me in the general mood. If I was writing something cheeky and funny, I'd listen to something comedic. Usually Pirates of the Caribbean, the Jack Sparrow soundtrack and that kind of stuff works quite well. That was one of my favourites for that. For the one I'm writing at the moment, the Secret Project.
This is the body horror, right?
The body horror, yeah. I'm pulling on my favourite movies, so Alien soundtrack I listen to, Alien Isolation, the game. Although I've never played it, I'm one of those people, I'm afraid. Sorry. I just listen to the soundtracks, I never play the game. But yes, that one, and Dead Space, because they've just got those wonderful, like, sort of violins and stuff. And I also listen to atmospheric music that some people have just randomly made, anything that fits the bill. So if I'm doing a scene where someone's walking down a deserted corridor, I'd pick something eerie, a bit of clanging in the background, and then when I'm editing, I'll have something a bit more upbeat. So when I'm doing my final edits, recently I've fallen into a habit of revisiting Prodigy, because like some of the music they made was just absolutely awesome, and it just gives me that energy to get through the edit, because it's not my favourite part. It is and it isn't, because I know when I'm editing it, that's when I'm really doing the writing and bringing it all together and putting in all of the advice I've had from my beta readers and people that have seen the manuscript. But I need some energy to get through it. Something lively like that, or some heavy metal. The Doom Eternal soundtrack's one I turn to quite a lot. It's got that nice beat to it. It's good for working out too as well.
So from what you've said, it sounds like it depends what you're writing and also what stage of the writing you're at. You've got your favourites.
Yeah, if I'm writing a sad scene and I want some emotion and I want to make people cry, I'll put on some sad music and make myself cry as much as possible when I'm writing it. And if I'm crying, and then hopefully my readers are going to sob a little bit. I want to pull on those heartstrings. I like physical reactions. If someone has a physical reaction out of my writing, then I've done my job.
And what is the most valuable piece of advice you've been given about writing so far?
Oh, there's so much, isn't there? two most valuable pieces. One is the first draft is the worst draft, and the second one is the 10% rule. I think I always use them. I use the first draft as the worst draft, which basically means anything you write first is just a pile of hot steaming poo, relative to you. So what I write as a first draft would be vastly different to what, say, Stephen King writes as a first draft. I imagine his first drafts are awesome because he's just really good at what he does, and he's been doing it a long time. But I imagine he would say the same. Like, even his first drafts, he'd be not happy with. So I'm the same. I think I actually read that in On Writing by Stephen King. Very good book if you're a writer looking for some good advice. Stephen King's On Writing is excellent. And I think it was him that said the 10% rule as well, actually, which basically means you take 10% of your final word count and cut it. That has the effect of really tightening your prose. It's the old killing your darlings kind of thing in writing. It forces you to probably chop part of the beginning, which is another piece of advice you're given. The opening scene that you write, I'm quite attached to mine, to be honest, so I break this rule sometimes, but the idea is the first opening scene or chapter you write is just you warming up as a writer, and it's probably should be cut or changed in some way. Usually you get to the hook a few paragraphs in, or a chapter in sometimes. So there you go.
So first draft is the worst draft. Cut 10%.
Cut 10%, and you're probably going to cut your first chapter or paragraphs of it. Yeah.
And as I said earlier, we're going to move back to May Contain Space Pirates. So, first off, what part of the book did you have the hardest time writing?
On Space Pirates, the hardest part of it. It was all a pain in the ass, to be honest. It was so messy, so messy. Because I was just free writing into the dark, pantsing, whatever you want to call it. Gosh, the hardest part.
So would it have been pulling it together at the end as a solid?
Yeah. Because it's all many little bits. There's lots of different stories. I was thinking basically of the old advice again, that if you want to get rounded characters, every character in your book is the hero of their story. So, and if you bear that in mind when you're writing characters, even side characters, even the guy that comes in, hands somebody a glass of water and then goes off screen, he's the hero in that. Like, how he hands that glass of water over is very important to him. So I guess with Space Pirates, there are lots of different character focal points, so I had to get into all of those heads, and there are very different voices. So I guess getting distinct voices and bringing that, and perspectives and tense, and bringing all of that together in something cohesive that wouldn't annoy the reader and confuse them or baffle them, but be texturally interesting to read. Because I like I said, I get bored really easily. So so my books reflect that. I switch and change from tense and POV, particularly in Space Pirates. Not all of my books, but particularly with Space Pirates, because it's a crazy adventure, and I wanted to get all of those facets of this very complex thing that's happening. You don't really get that much of it in the book. It's foreshadowing very gently. We're focusing on 58 a little bit more, but there is a bigger picture which I will keep hush about, but
because this is the first in a trilogy.
This is the first in the trilogy, yeah.
And actually, that leads me on to a question that I wanted to ask. Can you give us any teasers about what to expect in book 2?
More ridiculousness, a few more interesting POVs from other characters. Definitely some familiar faces, not just the crew, but some of the antagonists may or may not be coming back. Things happen. People get, I guess, kind of a little bit upgraded. Yeah. I'm going for a little bit more of a comedy horror kind of in this bit. I mean, that was because the book was originally, it was one book. I did a kind of Star Wars thing to it. I think Lucas originally is famously quoted that he originally wrote Star Wars as one book or movie, and it was just too massive, so he split it up. He took the middle section. I've done a similar thing with Space Pirates. I took the first part of the book, the beginning, and made that one book. And now Space Pirates 2 is literally the middle of the book. Mm-mm. And then Space Pirate 3, which was a terrible ending originally, is bitty. It's not complete, but it needs to be that way, because what I'm going to do with number 2 is going to bring in like a completely different dynamic. So I'm totally changing the ending from the original, based on how the characters developed in number 1, which I think are tighter, nicer, more interesting and nuanced characters. But yeah, number 2 is going to be fun. I'm really looking forward to writing it. I mean, it's already written, but I've got to work through editing it. I'm wiser now, and yeah, it's going to be crazy fun and hopefully a little bit scary, but in a comedic kind of way.
No pressure, but when do you think it might be out?
So my current project's nearly done, and that'll be published soon. So I'd say maybe beginning of 25.
Okay.
Yeah, around about then. Maybe if I...
Nose to the grindstone.
Nose to the grindstone. Maybe if I notch the gear up a little bit, I can get it out for a Christmas release. I don't know. But it'll be around then.
Watch this space.
Yeah, watch this space. Depends how annoyed I get with
it. And how you sweet talk your editor.
Yeah. I'm going to have to buy you lots of meals out, aren't I? And
something like that.
Yeah.
And finally, we know that you do your own cover design.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to an author who wanted to design their own cover?
So, I got a degree. A Bachelor of Fine Arts is what I got. I did that way back when, early 2000. Before that, I had been drawing since I could hold a pen, and I avidly drew everything. I was mainly copying like some of my favourites from Dark Horse Comics and stuff like that. Alien, Predator, Mask. So that's why I do my own. I know there are people out there that don't have any artistic background that do their own covers. I would caution there, because it is like writing. It's a skill that you pick up and you work with again and again and again, and you absorb lots of other styles of other writers or artists. So my advice is take your time. If you're going to do it, take your time. There are sometimes people, and I've done this, I've thrown a cover together with clip art and stuff. It shows, no offense to those people and authors out there that do that, but people are going to look at your book and they'll judge it. They will judge a book by its cover. That's exactly what people do. So you want your cover to be the best it can be. And if you are not a trained artist or a very experienced artist, then it's probably not going to be the best it could be. If you haven't got time or energy, because writing is a massive thing, hire an artist. There are loads of good artists out there. If you don't have the money to do that, then I don't know, get a drawing program. There are plenty out there. You can buy Photoshop. Critter is a free one, and it's basically like for Photoshop. That's what I use, and learn. When I started on Critter, I was awful. Everything looked like it was done in a like Microsoft Paint program. It looked really bad and unprocessed. And again, the same rule. The first book cover is your worst book cover.
So practice makes perfect.
Practice always makes perfect. I like when I finish my first draft of the book, I will do the cover. It won't be the cover that will go on the book, but I put it on my computer, and that reminds me that this book is basically already published. I've just got to write it. And that sometimes the book cover informs what I write in the story, and what I write in the story informs the book cover. So as an indie author, if you're doing both, it gives a really well gelled product for the reader, I think, because I can see elements of the book cover design within the writing itself. And you know your story well.
So it feels quite cohesive, the two things.
Hopefully, yeah. My first covers were okay. But I've definitely improved. But I've been doing that book cover work, and book covers are a completely different thing to just generally drawing and painting, because you've got to think about layout, how that's going to look on the book, how it's going to look out on the spine as well, and how that's going to transfer in terms of colour. If you're using something like Amazon direct publishing, what's that going to look like in gloss? Is it better in matte? Because it all has an effect. It's
lots of considerations.
Yeah, but it's worth it if you want to be like a totally independent indie author and you're doing pretty much everything. It's a massive job, but it can be very satisfying. And I'm a control freak. I like to have all control over my project.
I was going to say, you get the ownership of it, then it's yours.
Yeah, there's something really quite nice saying, like, I designed the cover, I edited it, and like I know you edit as well, but I do quite a lot of the editing before I hand it over to you, because I want to lessen the pain as much as possible. But it is very satisfying. And especially when people come back to you, as they have with me, saying, "I love your cover work. Who does it?" and stuff like that. And
it's quite satisfying.
Little old me.
Aww.
No, yeah, it's good.
Cool. So I'm going to leave it there for today, and at some point we'll pick up with a bit of a teaser on your body horror, hopefully.
Yeah. Watch this space on my website. Upcoming. I mean, I can give you the title of it. It is already. It's already in on my website. So drum roll. Silentium.
And is there any teeny tiny teaser that you can leave us with today?
If you loved The Thing and Aliens, then you will love Silentium, where a group of people on a cargo ship unwittingly find themselves trapped beneath the ice.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah. And
Silentium.
there's something horrible, of course.
Of course.
Yeah. Under the ice. So yeah, that's Silentium. Yeah.
Watch this space.